Hey there, sports history fans. Arnie Chapman of Fantasy Football Origin Stories here to tell you about a new way to play fantasy football this upcoming season. Tailgate Fantasy Sports is the game you've been waiting for. It's a new type of fantasy football that's totally free and easy to play. Just sign up with your email, pick your favorite NFL team, and set a 3-man lineup using only players from that team. Rotate 2 players each week and add power-ups to boost your players' scores. The best part? 1 random power-up drops every week. Now, it's not going to replace your existing leagues. In fact, it might be the way to get some of your favorite players on your home team. Because we all know how hard it is to get your hometown team's players in your home league, right? That is, if you truly follow some semblance of an ADP. I mean, come on. You think I'm getting Amon-Ra, the sun god, at market value in my home league? Pick number 7? You gotta be kidding me, dude. Get all the rules over at tailgatefantasysports.com. But the real action happens at tailgatefantasy.io. Tailgate Fantasy Sports, where true fans rule the game. Join now and help us put the word fan back into fantasy football. This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, sports fans, and welcome to another edition of Yesterday's Sports on the Sports History Network. Today, I would like to discuss Super Bowl IV. Why Super Bowl IV? Well, because it's the first Super Bowl I remember watching. I was roughly 2.5 months shy of my 8th birthday. And having watched the 1969 season with my father and older brother, I was beginning to understand the game well. I was reading everything football related I could get my hands on, including the back of my 1969 Topps football cards. The Minnesota Vikings were heavily favored to defeat the Kansas City Chiefs. The Vikings came into the game with a 14-2 record and had just destroyed the Cleveland Browns in the NFL Championship 27-7. But the Chiefs were no slouch either. They came into the game with a 13-3 record, despite their quarterback Len Dawson missing 6 games due to injury. I predicted a Chiefs victory based on 3 factors. Number 1, they had an innovative coach in Hank Stram. Number 2, they outsized the Vikings, who had only 2 players weighing over 260 pounds and no players weighing over 270 pounds. The Chiefs had 3 players weighing over 260 pounds and 4 weighing between 270 and 285. Number 3, the Chiefs had better and more athletic players, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Defensive tackles Buck Buchanan and Curly Culp. Outside linebacker Bobby Bell. Middle linebacker Willie Lanier, safety Johnny Robinson, and cornerback Emmett Thomas. They had Len Dawson at quarterback and Jan Stenerud, the best place kicker in football. All of the players mentioned above made it to the Hall of Fame. The game was played on January 11th, 1970. At Tulane Stadium in New Orleans. The temperature was 55 degrees, and the field was wet and muddy. During the pregame festivities, a hot air balloon crashed into the stands, but thankfully there were no injuries. The Vikings won the coin toss and started at their 20-yard line after a touchback. They had 2 significant gains on pass plays, one to Dave Osborne for 10 yards and one to receiver John Beasley for 27 yards. They got down to Kansas City's 38-yard line, but couldn't get any further. They elected not to try a field goal, even though, at that time, the goalpost was on the goal line. So it would have been about a 45-yard attempt. Their kicker, Fred Cox, was known for having little success with anything beyond 40 yards. So they punted, and it was a lousy punt, only 22 yards. A pass completion to Mike Garrett gained 17 yards for the Chiefs, and a 20-yard completion to Frank Pitts got it to the Vikings' 36-yard line. Vikings linebacker Roy Winston sacked Dawson for an 8-yard loss, and the drive stalled. Unlike the Vikings, the Chiefs had a kicker in Jan Stenerud who could kick the long ones. Kansas City took a 3-0 lead. Then Stenerud kicked the ball into the end zone again on the kickoff, and the kicking game was already impacting this game. The Vikings went 3-and-out, and defensive end Jerry Mays had a 6-yard sack on Joe Kapp. The Vikings punted, and the Chiefs were penalized for roughing the punter. So Minnesota got the ball back, but again went 3-and-out. After a 50-yard punt, Kansas City took possession at the 20-yard line. Neither team could establish a running game, but Len Dawson was picking them apart, and Jan Stenerud kicked a 32-yard field goal to make the score 6-0. On their next possession, the Vikings had the ball at their 32-yard line, and on second down, they fumbled, giving Kansas City the ball at the Vikings' 46. But on second down, Paul Krause from the Vikings intercepted a Len Dawson pass, giving Minnesota the ball on their 7. Kansas City's defense continued to smother the Vikings' offense, and they had to punt again. Frank Pitts returned the punt 19 yards, and Kansas City got into field goal range again. Stenerud booted a 25-yarder to give the Chiefs a 9-0 lead. Kansas City kicked off, and Minnesota fumbled the return. The Chiefs took possession on the 19-yard line. After a Jim Marshall sack of Len Dawson, Kansas City gained 23 yards on the next 2 plays. The following 2 plays gained nothing, and Kansas City was faced with a 3rd and 5 from the 5-yard line. Coach Hank Stram called the famous 42 toss power trap. Mike Garrett went in for the touchdown, and the Chiefs took a commanding 16-0 lead. The Vikings took over on their 32, and Joe Kapp connected with John Henderson for a 27-yard gain. But 2 incompletions and a Buck Buchanan sack of Kapp gave the Vikings no choice but to send in kicker Fred Cox to attempt a 56-yard field goal, which he missed. The Chiefs ran 7 plays and got the ball to the Vikings' 49 before punting. The Vikings ran 2 plays that went nowhere, and the first half ended with the Chiefs completely dominating the game. Next week, we will have the second half of the Super Bowl IV between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Minnesota Vikings. Until then, take care and God bless.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network. your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, and I wanted to thank you for stopping by to listen to another episode here on the Sports History Network. Our podcasters are passionate about uncovering and sharing sports stories from yesteryear. And if you didn't know it already, we have over 30 shows across the network covering all sorts of sports history topics. In fact, here's a glimpse into one of our awesome podcasts here on the network.
Hello, football friends. This is Darren Hayes of the Pigskin Dispatch podcast, and I'd like to invite you to the portal of positive football history, Pigskin Dispatch and pigskindispatch.com. We talk about everything that centers around the game of American football, expert discussions, the origins of the games, the great players, teams, and coaches, and more, and some great guests and insights from experts. We have new episodes 3 to 4 times a week, and you can find us on sportshistorynetwork.com, pigskindispatch.com, or your favorite podcast provider.
How about that? I bet you're super hyped to go listen to that new podcast, right? Well, to learn about this show and all the other podcasts on the network, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com/podcasts. Again, that's sportshistorynetwork.com/podcasts. Head over there today to find your next favorite sports history podcast.